Now we are have connected the panel to the switch, and we are ready to start using the panel. But before we can use it for our application, we have to have the same firmware in the panel as we have in our panel builder. So to do that, we will download a new firmware to the panel. And the first thing to do is to open the back of the panel, move the switch to on. After a boot, the panel will be ready to download new firmware. So what we have to do also is to disconnect the power and connect the power, and then the panel automatically boots, but in a mode that makes it possible to download firmware. And what you can see here is that the status says dip switch off, on, off, and that's what it should be. So if you have that, you have made the panel ready for downloading firmware. And then for downloading the firmware, there is a special piece of software included on the CD that you need to do that. So you go into on the CD, you go into the bin folder, and you go into extras, and in extras there is a firmware folder, and then you select the panel 800, and then you select the right version, and then you can see that there is an IML folder. You double click on the IML folder and you get into the image loader. And here you can see that the first step we have already taken care of, putting the dip switch in the right position and restarted the panel. We press next, and in the next step here we can see that the IP address and the subnet mask that we would like to have in the panel after we have loaded the firmware. And for the panel to be able to talk to the controller, it has to be on the same network. So we put it onto the 172.16.4.160, for instance. And our subnet mask has to be 255.255.255.252, just in the same way as for the compact HMI and the S800M. And we press next. And when we press next, we can see that we have a selector box where we can select operator terminal. And if we click on that, we can see the MAC address of the panel that we would like to download firmware to. And if we want, we can also look at the panel here and see that we have the same MAC address is displayed on the panel. And then we press upgrade. And now the panel is receiving the new firmware from the PC. And this takes us some time, so we can wait for that. So what is happening is that we first download the firmware, and then we write this to the flash memory in the panel. So when we have done this, this is safely stored in the panel, so next time it will load the new firmware if you power off and power on again. And as you can see, we can see the progress on the panel screen as we are downloading and starting up with the new firmware. One thing that is important to notice when you make a firmware upgrade of the panel is that you're not allowed to do a downgrade of the firmware to any version that is less than the version that you had on the panel when you got it delivered first time. So you always have to go versions up from that level. You cannot downgrade from the version that you got in the panel when you bought it. Okay, now we can see that the upgrade is complete on the PC, and we are asked, do we want to upgrade another terminal? In this case we say no. Next step we have to do is that we have to go to the panel. We have to switch back the dip switch to the normal mode, close, and then disconnect the power and connect the power again. And by doing that, the panel is now loading with the new firmware.